Hello, my name is Connor Quinlan, and in this review I'm going to be doing an overview of the Nikon D3x digital SLR. Now the Nikon D3 is the most professional digital SLR Nikon has right now. It's the top of the line. So basically in this video I'm not going to be talking about tech specs and stuff like that because people who would even be interested in this camera pretty much know about that already. What I'm going to talk about are some of my favorite features of the Nikon D3x and also why I decided to upgrade to the D3x and get rid of my D3, because I originally did have a Nikon D3 camera that I thought I was going to be using for a long time, but after 6 months I decided to fully upgrade to the D3x. So what I'm going to do with this review is kind of compare what I like better about this camera than the D3 and also why I decided to upgrade. First thing that I really like about this camera is the ISO range. I am a landscape photographer, so having a lower noise and lower ISOs is really a lot better for me in terms of landscape. The D3 went down to 200 and could go even lower down to 100, and then the D3x has a native ISO of 100 and can go all the way down to 50 ISO, which is really nice, and that means I'll get a little less noise in all my images, and also I can make the exposure longer if I want to take a long exposure of moving water or something like that, something similar. The next thing that I also really liked about this camera is the fact that it now adds actually an auto mode in the active D-lighting mode setting. In the D3 you only have low, normal, and high. In the D3x you also have an extra high function and an auto function. And I went out and gave that auto function a test to see if it worked well, and it works pretty well. It does a good job of determining which active D-lighting setting to use in situations. So that was really neat, I thought. Another favorite part of this is the noise control and how the noise is controlled with this camera. It's very different than with the D3. The Nikon D3 uses more noise reduction, so you don't get as much noise in your image, but there's not as much detail at higher ISO. The D3x, it actually doesn't reduce the noise as much, and in turn you get a little more noise in your image, but you also get much more detail, a much sharper image at say ISO 800 to 1600. And I actually prefer that to actual noise reduction, and that's going to be especially useful for wildlife photos. Finally, the last difference, and the most obvious difference, of course, is the megapixels, and that is the reason basically why I upgraded from the D3 to the D3x, but it's not for the reason you think. I didn't get this so that I could have more megapixels for landscape photography. I actually did it for wildlife photography, and that's what I'm going to talk about right now, is why I decided to go for the D3x instead of sticking with the D3. In the end, the D3 has plenty of megapixels for anything. 12 megapixels is enough for me for landscape pictures. I could always print very large images with a 12 megapixel image. But that wasn't the problem with the camera. The problem was taking pictures of wildlife, like I said. I have only two other lenses, 14 to 24 and 70 to 200 millimeter lens with a teleconverter, and I used to use that all the time on my D300 and get good results. Well, after using it on the D3, a full frame camera, I started to realize that about 50% of the pictures that I took weren't close enough, couldn't get me close enough to the wildlife that I was taking a picture of. So what I had to do was either use the DX mode or crop down, crop the image a little bit. And the problem with that is that the DX mode only has about 5 megapixels to work with. And I really hoped that that would be enough to be able to print out substantially large prints, but it just simply isn't. The max I could pretty much print out was 12 by 18 millimeter. Anything close to 30 by 20 or bigger, you just could see too many pixels, and the image quality just wasn't that great. So there were either two decisions that I could have made. I could have either saved up for a very large super telephoto lens for several $1000s, which weighs 6 to like 8 pounds, or I could have gotten the D3x. With the lenses, yes, I would have had the range now to get the wildlife, and I could have used it in full frame mode the whole time and gotten great images, but then I would have had to carry around a huge heavy lens, which already weighs about as much as all the equipment I have together. And the problem is I like lightweight. If I didn't, I would have two different camera bodies and tons more lenses, including super telephotos. But weight is a big problem for me. I like to carry around lighter equipment, and I like to carry around as little as possible. I hold all my stuff on a shoulder strap around my shoulder so I have easy access to it immediately. And about 50% of the wildlife shots that I've gotten have come from me having it on that shoulder pack instead of like a huge backpack. So I don't plan on changing that. So I want to carry as little equipment as possible. And carrying around a huge super telephoto lens just wasn't appealing to me. So the other way I could go is get the D3x. With the D3x I'm able to use the DX mode, which has 10 megapixels, plenty for printing out pictures that are 3-4 feet wide, and very good quality as well, since this is one of the best digital SLRs out there on the market today. And I wouldn't have to get a super telephoto lens. I could use the lens I have now and get plenty close enough to wildlife and have plenty of megapixels to not have to worry about cropping and stuff like that. That is the main reason why I decided to get the D3x, for a simple reason like that. And the good thing is that not only do I get more megapixels for my wildlife pics now, but now I also got 24 megapixels for landscape photos. So it's kind of like a win-win situation. I'm able to get my pictures of wildlife now with plenty of megapixels, and I'm able to get much larger landscape pictures as well. And that's why I chose the D3 over getting a super telephoto lens for why I chose the D3x instead of getting a telephoto lens for my D3. Now, the only real disadvantage to switching to the D3x was losing the little bit of the speed that I got with the D3. Do 9 frames a second in full frame mode. With this, I can only shoot 5 in full frame mode, but in 7 or in DX mode, I can shoot 7 frames per second. That is a little bit of a loss, and it was something that I had to deal with and had to think about a lot. But in the end, really after using this camera at the Desert Museum for the birds and stuff like that in flight, 7 frames per second is really plenty fast enough. I was able to capture the images I wanted. Maybe I won't be able to capture images 100% of the time, but it's fast enough for me to be able to capture most of what I want. I used to use the D300 and that shot at 6 to 8 frames a second. And that was perfectly fine with me. That was plenty fast enough for wildlife. So 7 frames a second is good too. And yes, I will only be able to shoot 5 frames per second in full frame mode. But if I am using full frame mode, chances are the wildlife is pretty slow or pretty close anyway, so I won't really need that super speed.